Hi everyone, my name is Joshua Davila, and I'm going to be talking about solidarity primitives, a techno-conceptual framework for building alternative tech. I really appreciate Naomi's presentation right before. I think it really made the stage for what I'm going to talk about for this presentation. I think when it comes to culture, kind of one of the things that I'm interested in pursuing in the hopes of improving the culture in the crypto space is to also provide kind of a material type of solution for what I think is the cause of the cultural problem. So let me explain a little bit. And so in case you don't know me, where do I? Where? Oh, is that me? Okay, there it is. Yeah, so I have a blog and a podcast called The Blockchain Socialist. I've worked in blockchain for quite a few years. I founded a project called Bread Cooperative, and I wrote a book called Blockchain Radicals in 2023, which I have a couple of more copies, signed copies left if you'd like to buy some. And yeah, so this conceptual framework of solidarity primitives is kind of the way that informs the way that we build applications at Bread Cooperative. So I'll explain this a little bit. But to kind of prep and set the scene for people, I know Naomi did a really good job of also pointing out a lot of the bad things happening in the crypto world. I want to kind of contextualize that in the broader context of the world. We see a lot of kind of scary trends, I think. We see for the first time ever, the life expectancy in a place like the United States, which is the richest country in the world, has decreased. We have had continuous kind of separation of productivity and wages since the 1970s. We've seen an increase in inequality across all racial groups. If you're at the top 1%, then you're making more money, and if you're not, then you're stagnating or making less. We have profits continue to grow, yet at the same time, while wages are also still declining. We have climate change. We have this database that is now going to capture all of Americans' data in a single place. I would like to, for me, these are manifestations of Moloch, which we used to talk quite a bit about in the crypto space, there on the top left. And so I think it is not so surprising, in a sense, that crypto is also in a similarly kind of cruddy place, where we have as well meme coins based on suicides. We have Coinbase sponsoring the silly military parade. We have Trump coin, Libra, we've got Malay created, just open kind of like, it seems like illegality is legal now in a lot of places. Crypto has been kind of a part of pushing that forward. And I don't think that this is necessarily an indictment of all of what crypto can do, of course, but this is, as Naomi pointed out earlier, that this is what people are seeing, and it's also affecting, there are quite large amounts of money that are being shoved around in the name of a lot of these things. And so in the context of this, I think we have to kind of come together and realize the reality that voting is not really going to fix a lot of these problems, that this liberal idea that we can vote away fascism is kind of moot, kind of silly, that we're going to need a whole lot more than that, and taking action by building alternatives is one of these things that we need to be going forward with. But so to think about, in my view at least, kind of one of the sources of where this tension comes from is that we have generally, I think, this false dichotomy going around where you have the market and the state. And depending on where you are in the political spectrum, you're either pro-market or you're pro-state. If you're on the left, you're pro-regulation and you love like the state doing everything for you. And if you are on the right, then you're very pro-market, where the entrepreneurial mindset is the thing that's going to move us forward. But in reality, there is more to this than in society, more than just these two sectors. While the market is a place that is organizations that are for profit or their purpose is to maximize profit, the state is an entity that regulates, that tries to understand and segment society in a way that it can regulate it. There's also this third sector, which is often called the autonomous or civil sector, also sometimes referred to as the solidarity economy. So this would include things like cooperatives, things like community currency, free and open source software, I say would fit in that as well, labor unions, community land trusts, mutual aid organizations, not-for-profits, and common resources, amongst many other things. But these are generally types of organizational structures that do not fit under a market logic or a state logic. They are neither trying to maximize for profit, nor are they trying to regulate on behalf of the state. And so, at least for me, I would argue that this is the sector that crypto has the greatest amount of opportunity as far as improving the current state of the world, is by focusing on this sector of society. And so, when we're talking about solidarity, I kind of want to explain a little bit of what I mean by that, because I think people oftentimes conflate it with something like charity. So solidarity isn't just better charity, it's a fundamentally different approach to addressing community needs. So it comes out of one of the places where it comes out of is the labor movement. It was the idea that during the Industrial Revolution, while the kind of the capitalist class and the royalty at the time were taking the land away from people who were simply serfs on it and then forcing them to work in factories for wages that they would not necessarily know. The idea was to all collectivize together as one big union in order to negotiate for better wages or to take over factories to run for themselves rather than at the benefit of just a few people. And so while charity is something that maintains existing power structures and often depends on them for funding. So what you often have is you have a philanthropist who makes his money by creating negative externalities for society and then creating a charity in order to try to mitigate the problem at the same time. Solidarity instead is one where you actively redistribute power and build alternative systems that are collectively controlled. And so this is just like a little table to help you kind of delineate whether something is more of a charitable action versus a solidaristic one. Is it something that is hierarchical, where donors at the top are kind of mandating what is happening with the money and the resources, or is it horizontal? Is the sustainability simply the goodwill of donors, or is there some sort of mutual interdependence? Are there charity boards, or is it communities? Generally, charities will treat symptoms, so they will throw money at a problem to mitigate its worst effects, whereas solidarity is about addressing the root causes and building alternatives. And so it's the difference between a disconnected donation versus something that is community-owned and ran. And so something, just to add a caveat, that this is kind of a spectrum, that things are not necessarily very cleanly one or the other, but that they can be in this mix a little bit in between, where someone can treat something that has solidaristic intentions as a charity simply because that's the way that they relate to it. But it's an important distinction, I think, to keep in mind. And so, talked about this. What does solidarity actually have to do with technology? We haven't really talked about it so much. So to kind of break it down a bit, I would like to bring up, that technical infrastructures that we've been building, like peer-to-peer models, and in comparison with the centralized client-server model, they're two distinct technical architectures, but they actually produce very different results and new possibilities. And so we see this quite viscerally in the way that peer-to-peer file sharing changed the music industry. Since 1999, the launch of Napster, music revenues have not been able to get back up to the same levels. In part, this has a lot to do with the free movement of files, right? The peer-to-peer file sharing network that facilitated this created material effects in the economy, and also produced a different type of culture around music as well, for better or for worse. If you look at the way that Napster looks, and then you look at how Spotify looks, they more or less look the same, right? Basically, corporations adapted to the new reality where they created music streaming, in which you have basically the same library as a peer-to-peer file sharing service, but with a much better user interface and experience, and lack of getting the potential to be sued or wherever else. This is also the case if we look at organizational structures. So if you look at a traditional corporation versus a cooperative in which workers are member owners, so they are also owners of the company besides not just working there, this also produces different economic effects. So we see that wage inequality is quite different in a traditional corporation versus a cooperative. So in the US, you have an average of 339 to 1 CEO to line worker wage average, which is a pretty high amount of inequality when you look at it. In the case of a cooperative, if we take the example of Mondragon, which is the largest cooperative or one of the largest cooperatives in the world, they only do 6 to 1 or 9 to 1. So you can see that the organizational structure makes a big difference. And so if we combine these two claims together, that I'm saying that new socio-technological structures allow for new possibilities. So this is in particularly visible in the case of Web3, where on a Web2 platform, your profile, your identity, your information is attached to and owned by the platform owner, whereas in the Web3 space, generally with some caveats depending on the application and its association with your wallet and account, you have ownership over the data that is connected to it, right? So you are porting your identity to a different place or whatever. You're taking the same identity one place to another versus you have your Google account, you have your Facebook account or whatever else, and each of them have their own domains in which they are kind of heavily influenced by those. And we see that this kind of setup also produces like interesting things that we were never able to do before thanks to crypto. We see a lot of, there is, although a lot of financialized behavior that Naomi did a very good job at critiquing, there also is a bit of seeds of cooperative behavior that we've seen in the case of Uniswap, which I think was a really interesting one. A token airdrop based on the use of the platform also simulates a kind of a cooperative, like a producer cooperative or something of the sort. Safes are multi-signature wallets, like a joint bank account. You could collectively own NFTs through various platforms. And so not everything necessarily has to be individualized, and it's something that clearly people want. And so what has it look like in crypto in the past? I think we see it actually in the very start. The kind of like almost founding myth of Bitcoin was WikiLeaks and their loss of their PayPal and their bank accounts, where by accepting donations in Bitcoin, you were able to support the continuation of WikiLeaks, and so they were able to pay for their architecture, their infrastructure for being able to host all the information about the war crimes that the US and its allies were committing in the Middle East. We also see this, last year especially was working a lot with ETH evacuations, where we were sending crypto to Gaza for evacuations while the border crossing was still open. There's a really interesting art project that was in 2017, I want to believe, called Bail Block, where they took this concept of cryptojacking, which is where a kind of hacker will get into your computer and start mining a certain cryptocurrency through your browser. In this one, you can opt in to being cryptojacked, but the Monero that was being mined would go to pay people's bail in the United States. And I would also argue that Circles probably as well, just because we're at DappCon, is a type of solidarity, a version of solidarity in the crypto space potentially. And so in order to explain what I mean by solidarity primitives, I think we need to talk a little bit about DeFi primitives, or like this is a common term to talk about the building blocks of what developers often put together and combine in order to make more complex, largely financial products. That is kind of like a big chunk of it, but not all of it. But we have accounts, ERC20s, multisigs, NFTs, AMMs, DEXs, lending, flash loans, et cetera, et cetera. You probably know a whole lot more if you're a developer. You've probably messed with a lot of these things and took and combined them in ways to produce different types of products. So when I'm saying solidarity primitives, I'm also talking about building blocks. And I'm also talking about kit bashing. Kit bashing is this concept I really like. It's something that if you're into model trains or like any type of building models, then you can, it's the practice of taking different kits and combining the pieces together to make a different model, to make your own customized model. It's something that was also a kind of practice as a way in hacker spaces to kind of fight back against the corporatization of a lot of these things, but it's also a very common practice in hacker communities, right? Programmers steal each other's code all the time, and they don't really care. It's something that's quite normalized, and so kit bashing is kind of what I mean when I'm talking about solidarity primitives, which is essentially taking development tools which help facilitate relationships of solidarity between individuals and collectives. So kit bashing is taking things like DeFi primitives and combining them in a way that produce a different logic that don't have to do with profit maximization. They are, rather than taking what I was saying earlier, technology as a facilitator of relationships, it's being cognizant and being aware of the type of relationships that you're trying to build. And so these are the types of things that I think, when we're talking about the malaise that we have, I think, in crypto culture, solidarity primitives is a type of conceptual framework that I'm trying to share with you as a way to think about how you build applications and how you also maybe build your own organizations. And so to kind of differentiate, again, another table to make it easy for people, what is the difference between a DeFi primitive and a solidarity primitive? On DeFi, of course, a lot of it has to do with financial relationships, so profit maximization is built into it. It's why I think the speed of capital, the way it can move on crypto rails allows for this profit extraction happen in ways that we never thought possible before, which produces, I think, the culture then of gambling and extreme financialization that we see. Versus a solidarity primitive, which is not meant to do that. It's meant to facilitate relationships of mutual aid. In a DeFi primitive, the user relationship is largely individual, whereas in a solidarity primitive, you have co-conspirators that are building networks that are more intentional. And so on and so forth. So I think that, you can see how they differ. There are many ways in which you can use the same pieces that facilitate finance to also facilitate solidarity. And this, of course, is also extremely relevant for privacy. I think there's also, if I had another 20 minutes, I would talk about the need for solidarity in the building of solidarity privacy solutions, because you need a way to mask people's identity by having a pool. There's a requirement of collectivity in order to provide privacy. And so that's kind of the conceptual framework that we're using at Bread Cooperative, which is the project that I co-founded with a couple of others. I think my co-founder will be speaking a bit later on stealth addresses. But yeah, we're basically a solidarity network of post-capitalist projects involved in crypto. We share labor power and much more. We are trying to build alternatives to alternative structures for a kind of post-capitalism, so a kind of decrease in reliance in capital as a dominant form of relationship in which we relate to one another, we relate to institutions and so forth. So the idea is to kit bash all of these various DeFi primitives to scale solidarity using crypto as an alternative to competition and extraction. And so this is our first solidarity primitive called our Bread crowd staking application. I also have this on my shirt, which the designers made for me. But essentially, very quickly, it's an application where you give XDAI, and however much XDAI you give, you receive back the same amount in Bread tokens. The XDAI in the smart contract gets converted into SDAI, so it earns a yield, and that yield can get distributed to the various member projects in the network, and as a holder of Bread, you can vote on how you want to distribute that yield. So it mimics a combination of a community currency and a credit union kind of in one. So we've taken the the same primitives that you can use to build hyper-financialized, poo-poo coin stuff, to instead build something with a different logic by kit bashing it together in a way that were necessary for our needs. So this is largely a way for us to raise money without necessarily needing to take any investments or something like that. And so I have a lot of conviction and solidarity. That's why I just want to show this to everyone, that this is something that you can do, and you can accomplish quite a bit with it. We have now expanded the scope of the project quite a bit. What's really nice is that when you start from a place of solidarity, then you tend to attract a lot of people who want to contribute to your project. So the picture kind of on the bottom right was at Funding the Commons, where we had 2 days of programming and sessions. So we had about, I didn't even realize we kind of had that big of a network. Like over 20 people were in Berlin, working and talking and doing sessions together, all who had some sort of connection with the cooperative. And this has ended up being to where we have not just the application, we've created white label solutions on Optimism. We're now building, for-profit products as well. So it's all in large part because we had this type of trust relationship that we built up, rather than starting in the place of trustlessness and thinking of markets as a way that will discipline people in order to do work. We started from a place of what is it that you actually want to do, what is the way that you want to contribute, and let's go from there. And so this comes from kind of like a big thesis that I have also for why what exactly we should be doing with crypto, and that's building collectively owned digital infrastructure. I think this is kind of the, if I had to give one thing that we should be doing, is probably that, and this is effectively what would strengthen the that third sector, right, the civil autonomous sector or the solidarity economy. So yeah, thank you so much. If you want to learn more, breadchain.xyz, we have a subreddit, a Discord, Twitter, all that jazz. You can check that out. Thanks.
Thanks, Josh. Any questions? No. Oh, please do.
Thanks for the talk. And I got one question, because like what I've seen in DAOs and like all these collectives so far is they become like highly politicized in a way that like it's about influence. Very often this hidden influence that you cannot even see in terms of people's position. And do you have any ideas how to solve it long term? Or maybe you've seen some examples of good practices here?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think so generally the kind of thinking that I had is we're trying to move at the speed of trust. Does that make sense? So I think a lot of DAOs had a lot of big ideas about like scale, that it was kind of like imposing a startup mentality on something that was meant to be collective, which is kind of it's a hard thing to square those two together at once and to be effective, I think. So for us, I'm a big fan / practitioner of this thing called micro-solidarity, which is kind of like a practice group for how to do decentralized organizing. So it's a lot of people who are involved in decentralized organizing that don't have to do with crypto at all. I found that there's like a lot to learn from people like that who have run other types of things like cooperatives and other types of collectives or purpose-oriented types of organization that I've just gotten a lot of inspiration from. So generally I try to take it slow. We have just different kinds of practices and how we interact and talk with each other. I guess my critique a little bit of DAOs as well is that they frame everyone as a contributor, which is a very broad term that can mean everything and nothing, which then ends up kind of hiding the fact that maybe someone's actually a worker. Someone actually is just like an employee. They just work, but they're calling themselves a contributor, so then there's no expectation of like how they get treated, how they get paid. So it's also about yeah, since we're a cooperative, the thing that we generally do is we have practices around how we share our treasury and how we pay each other that is, yeah, collectively involved, kind of like a co-budgeting process, but that would take too long to explain. We can talk about it after.
One more, the last one maybe. Yep, please.
Hey Josh, thank you for your talk, first of all. And I have a question that is, like, in my opinion, there is a risk of over-romanticizing the concept of solidarity. Because, like, reality is harsh, and when people need money, they're selfish.
Yeah.
And, like, I love the concept of solidarity, don't get me wrong, but I think that it doesn't work on a global scale, it works on a smaller scale. So my question for you is, at which level do you think, like, solidarity works? Because we cannot, like, you know, that doesn't work for like 1 million people. It works for smaller groups. So I'm just curious to know your opinion on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good question. I think I have kind of, so I think there's a different form of practice, right? Like you can practice solidarity at a micro scale, and I think, you know, generally it's a good idea to do that as a way to get people to come around and do a thing together in a way that's like healthy. But I think solidarity can also, this might be a little bit triggering for some people, but I do think that solidarity does exist at like kind of larger scales that are also potentially abstract. So I mean, I do think that like a welfare system in many ways is a kind of manifestation, or can be a manifestation of solidarity in many ways, in which it doesn't rely on the individual, it doesn't rely on you to be a good person, right? Like I do think that it scales, but what it looks like at scale is kind of different. So to me, it's more so it's not about like, how do I make everyone be nice to each other? Like that's kind of not necessarily what I'm interested in, but it's using like solidarity at scale for me means that like you don't have to be nice to everyone to make things work, but that like it's embedded in the relationships in which we are taking part in. So it's not about policing you to be a solidaristic person, but that you would rather be in a solidaristic system even if you don't like that guy over there who's also